I'm telling you, they weren't jerks, they were decent men, but they were absolutely hardcore. The voice of Sam Elliott has echoed through generations. It's gravelly, it's powerful, you can't mistake it for anyone else. But behind that legendary mustache, the cowboy hats, and that iconic Western swagger, something is lurking that almost no fan ever saw coming. A quiet fury that's been boiling just beneath the surface for decades. You see, for all the mountains of respect Sam's piled up over his 60-year career, there are 6 actors he has absolutely refused to forgive. Some of them, he feels, committed crimes against the craft itself, but others, they wronged him personally, professionally, or even worse, betrayed him in the shadows. He has never, ever named them, until right now. At 80 years old, he is done holding back. And when you hear who actually made his blacklist, your entire view of them is going to be shattered. Let's dive right in with the actor who infuriated Sam so much that he stormed off a set, vowing never to return. Kevin Costner, the one Hollywood cowboy he absolutely could not stand. Sam Elliott built his entire legacy on pure authenticity. Every role, every single line, was earned the hard way. He wasn't just acting the part of a cowboy, he was the real deal, raised on actual ranches, soaked in the grit and discipline of the true Old West. Sam brought an energy to the screen that felt completely lived in, weathered, and gut-wrenchingly real. It was like you could smell the leather in his voice, you could feel the history in his stare. You believed him because he was the genuine article, so, when he laid eyes on Kevin Costner, playing a cowboy in Wyatt Earp, and later the supposedly rugged patriarch in Yellowstone, Sam was completely underwhelmed. To him, Costner was just a Hollywood fantasy of a cowboy. Pristine boots, slick lines, and flawless lighting. That wasn't the West, it was a soundstage. He apparently told a buddy that Costner plays a rancher like it's Halloween, like he's just cosplaying. A life he knows absolutely nothing about. And while millions of fans were obsessing over Yellowstone, its insane drama, and its gorgeous cinematography, and Costner's attempt at gravel-voiced seriousness, Sam just rolled his eyes. He wasn't seeing any reflection of the West he recognized. What he saw was a shiny, sanitized fantasy, cooked up for an audience that has never dug a fence post or smelled cattle at dawn. To Sam, it was nothing more than a postcard version of reality, totally filtered and romanticized. The rumor is, he was even offered a cameo on the show, but he shut it down immediately, calling it a soap opera with a cowboy hat. And that brutal rejection wasn't just about the screenplay, it was a declaration, a quiet but devastating rejection of the entire concept of Yellowstone. For Elliot, Westerns weren't just a form of entertainment, they were a moral code. He cherished grit, self-control, and the kind of powerful silence that screams louder than any words. Costner, in his view, just brought Hollywood shine, glamour, and a giant budget, but left all the soul behind. Apparently, whenever those two were in the same room, the tension was absolutely suffocating. One producer swore they never shouted, but the icy cold between them could freeze over a desert, and that showdown was just the start of it all. Next on the list, Benedict Cumberbatch, way too British for the West. In 2021, Sam Elliott absolutely floored fans and his own peers when he publicly unloaded on the power of the dog. There was no holding back, no polite Hollywood diplomacy wrapped up in empty compliments. His words were vicious, they were raw, and completely unapologetic, and they landed like a stray bullet in a silent saloon, loud, shocking, and absolutely impossible to ignore. But this wasn't just some critique about the movie's slow pace or its artsy choices, this was personal. Sam locked his sights directly on Benedict Cumberbatch, the British star of the film, with absolute, razor-sharp contempt, tearing into his accent, his posture, and what he infamously called a completely prissy portrayal of a Western rancher. Sam unleashed the kind of takedown, the kind of raw honesty you just don't see on some slick press tour. I mean, what the hell does some guy from England know about the American West, anyway? He practically spat the words out on a podcast, his voice just dripping with a mix of pure frustration and total disbelief. And boy, the backlash was instant and absolutely brutal. Cumberbatch's fans, and everyone who loved the movie's edgy take on manhood, came out swinging. Social media just went nuclear. Critics were calling Sam a dinosaur, a relic from a forgotten time who was just too damn stubborn to change with the very genre he helped build. They slammed him for gatekeeping, for desperately clinging to these old-school ideas of what a man should be, and flat-out refusing to let anyone new into the club. But did Sam back down? Not a chance. He didn't release some lame apology or try to walk back what he said. He stood his ground, dug his heels in. For Sam, The Power of the Dog wasn't just a bad movie, it was a slap in the face to the entire tradition it was pretending to honor. He felt like it was glorifying some twisted version of masculinity and completely missed the point of what a Western is all about. This wasn't just about trashing one actor's performance. He was making a stand for a whole legacy, for a genre built on quiet grit, real-world wisdom, and an unbreakable personal code. Now, Benedict Cumberbatch never fired back publicly, but sources say the comments cut him deep. Behind the scenes, studio bigwigs were supposedly scrambling, having hush-hush meetings about whether they should say something, maybe hit back with a carefully worded statement or some kind of slick, diplomatic comeback. But in the end, Cumberbatch chose to stay quiet instead of making a scene. Sam, though, he stood by every single word he said, like an old-school gunslinger who'd already taken his 10 paces and wasn't about to take back the shot. For him, the West wasn't some costume you put on or a cool Instagram filter. It was a real-deal code, a way of life that was all about truth, not what's trendy, and he'd be damned if he was gonna let anyone, no matter how famous, mess with it on his watch. And if you think that stirred up some trouble, just wait till you hear who he went after next. Ashton Kutcher, the guy he felt was a total embarrassment to the art of acting. See, for Sam Elliott, acting is basically a religion. It's not some high school popularity contest, and it's definitely not a playground for a bunch of fame-hungry wannabes, influencers, or tech bros. It's a true craft, one that's built on brutal discipline, endless patience, and pure, raw, emotional honesty. He was convinced that every single role had to be ripped from somewhere real, somewhere deep in your gut, something you've truly earned. So when Ashton Kutcher blasted into the stratosphere, off the back of that 70 Seconds show, and followed it up with a ton of fluffy rom-coms and slick tech deals, Sam wasn't just unimpressed, he was genuinely annoyed. To a guy like Elliot, it felt like a personal insult to everything he held sacred. But even so, when they both got cast in the Netflix series The Ranch, Sam didn't kick up a fuss. He showed up, he knew his lines, he did the job. The man's a pro, through and through. But behind the camera, you could feel the ice forming right from the start. People on set said the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, even when they weren't saying a word. Apparently, Sam would let off some steam to the crew in between takes, just shaking his head. Someone heard him say, "He's a nice enough kid, but he's not a real actor." And it wasn't about Ashton being a jerk or anything, it was his whole approach to the craft that just got under Sam's skin. To Elliot, Kutcher was the poster boy for the new Hollywood, a place where computer algorithms meant more than actual authenticity, where your follower count was more important than your resume, where being charming and meme-worthy beat out actual discipline and soul. In Sam's eyes, this wasn't progress, it was a total decay. The sacred art of telling a story was being completely watered down by cheap shortcuts, phony attitudes, and slick marketing. And yeah, the audience might have seen some great chemistry on screen, but Sam knew the cold, hard truth. It was all just an act, and nothing else. Kutcher, who's always Mr. Smooth in his interviews, would call Sam a legend and talk him up as a mentor. But when the cameras were off, Sam had a very different story to tell. He was way less impressed. He's acting like a dude who learned how to act from watching YouTube videos, he supposedly grumbled to a buddy. This wasn't some petty grudge, it was a crusade. Sam wasn't just mad. He was a guardian of a sacred, dying code. A code that screamed for presence, for quiet intensity, for raw truth. And he looked out at a world that was trading real storytelling for cheap spectacle, selling out tradition for a few pathetic clicks, and it absolutely disgusted him. Sure, The Ranch was a hit with the fans, but behind the scenes, it was a total sham. No brotherhood, no real connection. Just people barely putting up with each other. And then came the name that sent a real tremor through Sam's world, Nicolas Cage. Just way too loud, too bizarre. You see, Sam Elliott worships at the altar of subtlety. For him, the truly earth-shattering performances don't scream, they smolder. A single raised eyebrow, a silence so heavy it could crush you, a word held for just a moment too long that cuts you to the bone. He was convinced the very soul of acting wasn't in being the loudest one in the room, but in that iron-willed restraint, that quiet, rooted performance that doesn't desperately plead for your attention, it commands it. So you can imagine his horror when Nicolas Cage just detonated onto the scene with that wild, over-the-top style, all flailing arms, bulging eyes, and shocking outbursts. Sam didn't see a genius at work. He saw pure, unadulterated chaos. In his mind, Cage wasn't becoming a character. He was just staging a ridiculous spectacle, a one-man circus that hijacked every single shot and literally sucked all the oxygen out of the room. I mean, even when they were both in Ghost Rider, Sam kept a massive distance on that set. Oh, he was polite, sure, respectful, you bet, but warm? Absolutely freezing, not a chance. Later on, in interviews, Sam was too classy to name names, but his criticisms were like laser-guided missiles. He'd talk about these actors who hijacked the screen with their massive egos, who turned every single scene into their own personal Broadway show, always louder, always bigger, always flashier. And you better believe Sam's inner circle knew exactly who he was talking about. It was Cage. He's more of a firework than a real flame, Sam supposedly whispered to a close friend. All flash and bang, but absolutely no heat. So while Cage was building this massive cult following on his sheer unpredictability and manic energy, Sam remained fiercely loyal to a slower, more deliberate art. He was a devout believer in the power of underplaying, in making the audience lean in closer, not jump back in their seats. For Sam, Cage was the face of a deeply disturbing trend in Hollywood, a desperate thirst for shock value over a real story, a twisted love of chaos just because. He saw it as all style completely steamrolling any real substance, acting reduced to cheap entertainment, not a true art form. And yeah, while Cage snagged some awards and gave performances that critics gushed were brilliantly unhinged, Sam wasn't buying a single bit of it. Not for 1 second. To him, no golden statue on a mantelpiece could ever make up for what he saw as just empty, hollow theatrics. Because in Sam Elliott's Bible of acting, it was never about going viral. It was about going deep inside, about finding truth, about mastering that incredible stillness and humanity, the very soul of the craft that he believed Nicolas Cage had thrown away years ago. But then came the most shocking name of all, the one that truly cut the deepest. A man Sam once called his friend Jeff Bridges. This was the friendship that turned to ice. See, Sam and Jeff Bridges were supposed to be cut from the exact same cloth, gruff, grounded, and almost poetic in their silence. These guys didn't need some flashy monologue or a dramatic meltdown to completely command a scene. Their power was in their very presence, that incredibly rare, magnetic stillness that almost no actor ever truly masters. These were men who could scream volumes without ever raising their voices above a whisper. Together, they created absolute magic in the cult masterpiece The Big Lebowski, a movie that would become a massive cultural touchstone. On screen, their chemistry was electric, like two sides of the very same legendary coin. And off-screen, it was all laughs, deep conversations, and what everyone saw as a rock-solid friendship built on real trust and a whole lot of mutual respect. But then, somewhere down the road, something just shattered. Not in some big dramatic Hollywood explosion, but in a slow, tragic, quiet unraveling that neither man would ever speak of. But after Jeff Bridges clutched that Oscar for Crazy Heart, something inside him just shifted. Sam watched as the man he knew, the one who was all about humility, started to disappear. Suddenly, that down-to-earth charm was replaced by glossy magazine spreads and flashy red carpet appearances. He was plastering political slogans on his chest, sitting in these perfectly polished, soulless press events. And just like that, Jeff became a ghost, impossible to get a hold of. A source close to Sam said it best: less grounded, more manufactured. For Sam, it was like watching the raw, honest soul of his friend get completely scrubbed away. All that Hollywood gloss buried the man he knew, That simple code they lived by, letting the work speak for itself, was suddenly a forgotten promise. It all just crumbled under the crushing weight of fame. Then, in a rare interview, a reporter asked about old partners, and Sam dropped a bomb, a quiet, cryptic one, but a bomb nonetheless. "Some folks change," he said. "Others just show who they always were." The world knew exactly who he was talking about. It was a clear shot at Bridges, and even though Jeff never fired back, staying true to his cool-headed persona, the silence that hung between them was absolutely deafening. The invites to the same festivals, ignored. They weren't championing each other's films anymore. The on-screen brotherhood was officially dead, and for Sam, this wasn't about ego. It wasn't some petty rivalry. This wasn't about trophies or political statements. It cut way, way deeper. This was about watching a sacred bond slowly rot away. A friendship, he believed, was ironclad, forged not in the fires of fame but on shared principles, and when that foundation cracked, it left a hollow ache in its place. Sam never talked about it, but insiders whispered that he felt utterly abandoned, not by a single act of betrayal, but by a slow, painful drift. It was the cruel work of time, the gut-wrenching realization that the man who once stood shoulder to shoulder with him was now in a completely different universe. And that ache, that deep sting of a lost brother, was just a warm-up for what was coming next, because the final name on his list was someone he never, ever thought he'd have to call out. Jared Leto, the method actor who went completely off the rails. You see, Sam Elliott's #1 enemy is pretension. We're not talking about confidence or dedication. We're talking about that over-the-top, "look at me," self-importance that twists real art into a cringy performance piece. It's all for the actor's ego, not for the people watching. So when Jared Leto's name became synonymous with insane method, acting like mailing actual rats to his co-stars, or refusing to be a normal human being for weeks on end, turning movie sets into some kind of twisted mind game, Sam didn't see a genius at work. He saw a cheap trick. He couldn't care less about the screaming headlines or the Oscar statue. He was just flat-out annoyed by the whole circus. Sam once called it theatrics masquerading as talent, and believe me, he wasn't kidding. Behind closed doors, he was even more brutal. If it takes all that nonsense for him to act, he supposedly told a friend, maybe he picked the wrong line of work. For a guy like Sam Elliott, real acting doesn't need a publicity circus or a bunch of horror stories from the set. It's about vanishing into a character, quietly and professionally. You do it with skill and dignity. The goal isn't to create a three-ring circus, it's to breathe life into a character so the audience believes it. Now, Sam and Leto have never worked together, but here's a story the insiders tell. Sam was all set to do this one film, way back in the early stages. He loved the script, he was on board with the director, and then he got the news that Jared Leto was cast. That was it. He was out. No big announcement. Not even a phone call. Just a quiet, determined exit. That's how serious he was. For Sam, acting is sacred. It's not supposed to be a freak show. It's meant to be honest and real and human, the kind of stuff that touches your soul, not just shocks your senses. And that last name, it was the ultimate proof of how far the craft had drifted from what it was meant to be. Now, at 80 years old, Sam Elliott isn't hunting for roles anymore. He's hunting for truth. And a piece of that truth is that some actors, no matter how many awards they have, simply don't belong on that pedestal. Because for Sam, it all comes down to honesty, tradition, and self-control. And if that means he has to stand all by himself, so be it. And you know what? He's totally fine with that. Because in a town drowning in noise, Sam Elliott is the last true cowboy standing. But now, the spotlight's on you. Which of these unbelievable feuds completely blew your mind? And do you think Sam was just dropping truth bombs or being way too harsh? Unleash your thoughts in the comments, and don't you dare forget to smash that like button and subscribe, because a whole new storm of Hollywood secrets is about to break.